We are here. It is officially week 1, and I know it might sound a little weird to start looking at waiver wire pickups right now, but there are a handful of players available in a ton of leagues still that I believe need to be added today, possibly for free, before they start to break out. And the first player on this list is a player that I've talked about on this channel before, but recent news has elevated his breakout potential even more, and that is Jaleel McLaughlin, running back for the Denver Broncos, who is now locked in for the RB2 role in Denver after Samaje Perine was cut and ultimately signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the upside for McLaughlin in this Broncos backfield is tremendous, considering the type of player that he is. He is very explosive, he breaks a ton of tackles, and his college production profile is ridiculous with 1,900 yards and 15 touchdowns during his final season. We also know that Sean Payton absolutely loves throwing to the running back position. I mean, Nick Ercolano from BDGE just posted this chart showing how Payton offenses have ranked in terms of target share to the running back position since 2013, and it's top 5 every single year, including multiple seasons like last year as the team with the highest percentage of overall targets to the running back position. And then there's this tweet from Scott Barrett highlighting that in 18 years as an NFL head coach, Payton's team RB2 in terms of actual carries has averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game 5 times. And for perspective, 16.5 fantasy points per game is equivalent to Travis Etienne last year at RB7 overall. I also double checked this, and only one of those 5 occurrences was Alvin Kamara. Collectively, across all 18 seasons, Payton's RB2 averages 13.8 points per game, which is equivalent to James Cook last year as the RB19. And the final cherry on top, McLaughlin and Perine combined for 229 fantasy points last year, which would have been the RB13 on the season. And now, like I said, Samaje Perine is gone. It would not surprise me at all if McLaughlin saw 80 to 90 plus targets this year, plus maybe another 8 to 10 carries per game, and we could be looking at a potential 200 touchback with highly explosive capabilities. I mean, that's essentially what Jaylen Warren was doing last year as the Steelers' RB2, and he finished as the RB21 overall. Same goes with Austin Eckler as the RB24, or even the ultimate upside of Alvin Kamara with over 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns as the RB12 on the year. That is the upside that you could be getting with Jaleel McLaughlin, and you're getting him on waiver wires right now. And just while we're on the topic of running backs in general, there are 2 handcuffs that I would 100% be adding right now just to stash in case an injury happened, because you could be looking at legitimate RB1 upside if these guys became starters in their offenses. First is Marshawn Lloyd, running back for the Green Bay Packers, and the second is Jordan Mason, running back for the San Francisco 49ers. Both of these guys became extremely valuable handcuffs after their main competitions for the RB2 job went on season-ending IR. So if Christian McCaffrey or Josh Jacobs were to get hurt at all, which we've seen both of them do throughout their career, these guys would be league winners that you got for free right now in week 1. All right, now I usually don't roster 2 quarterbacks in my fantasy leagues, but if I did, my second quarterback pick would be taking the home run swing on Titans QB Will Levis, who is probably the biggest winner from the entire 2024 offseason with all of the moves that Tennessee has made since the beginning of March. Really, in a lot of ways, this feels similar to what the Eagles did with Jalen Hurts a couple years ago, just loading him up with weapons after showing flashes of potential here and there, but if he doesn't produce, there is no excuse other than the fact that he's just not a good quarterback. And I'm not saying that Will Levis is going to turn into Jalen Hurts, but there is a ton of upside here because of all the weapons that Levis has now, plus the upside from just the type of player and quarterback that Levis is. The Titans already had DeAndre Hopkins on the team, but then they went out and they signed Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd at the receiver position, 2 older but extremely productive and experienced veterans that gives Levis more receivers that can separate at multiple levels of the field. And even though they lost Derrick Henry in free agency, they signed Tony Pollard to add to Tyjae Spears, both of whom can be very dangerous receivers out of the backfield as well, and can be a competent runner to add a quality rush attack to the offense too. And then let's not forget maybe the most important addition to the Titans offense this year, the hiring of new head coach Brian Callahan from the Cincinnati Bengals and offensive coordinator Nick Holtz from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Callahan's experience as the Bengals offensive coordinator since 2019 is extremely important here, as his offenses have ranked top 12 in passing yards in each of the past 3 seasons, with Joe Burrow and his receiving core of Chase Higgins, Boyd and Mixon out of the backfield. You also look at Holtz's resume, who doesn't have all the experience that Callahan has, but was the passing game coordinator for the Jaguars last year, who were also 8th in the NFL in passing yards in 2023. So between both of the new offensive coaches' resumes, plus all the moves that they made in the offseason of allowing Derrick Henry to walk, plus signing actual quality wide receivers, there's really only one logical goal for the Tennessee Titans this year: throw the ball more and throw the ball effectively, which is the complete opposite of what the Titans' offensive philosophy has been since forever. So now bringing it all back to Will Levis, who just from his 8 starts last year was already on pace for 3,800 passing yards and 17 touchdowns, which would have made him a top 20 fantasy quarterback. If we just moderately bump his yards to 4,000 and his touchdowns to 20, that now makes him a top 15 quarterback just from the passing stats alone, not even mentioning if he actually starts to run and scramble like he did in college. If we give him 300 rushing yards in the year, which is in that Dak to Jordan Love to Sam Howell range, now he's a borderline fantasy QB1 as essentially this year's version of Sam Howell. I mean, that's really all it takes here, but that's not even accounting for the possibility that Levis drastically improves in year 2, that the Callahan offense and all the new weapons raises Levis's production even more, that Levis himself doesn't run 100 plus times this year like a lesser version of Josh Allen. His range of outcomes is seriously anywhere between not being a starter in the NFL by the end of the year to an okay streamer in the right matchup, to this year's Sam Howell, to this year's Jordan Love. That is the entire spectrum of outcomes for Levis this year, and I think we're going to find out very quickly in the season just where on the spectrum he lands. Now, moving to the wide receiver position, I was quite shocked to see how available Curtis Samuel was in both ESPN and Yahoo leagues, especially for the upside that he could have as the wide receiver 1 for Josh Allen. I know everyone's in love with Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman is the fun new rookie, but the most productive and experienced veteran on this team is Curtis Samuel, and I would not be shocked at all if he outproduced everybody on this team for fantasy. Let's not forget that Curtis Samuel is already familiar with a Joe Brady offensive system, as he played under Brady on the Panthers back in 2020 in what is actually his most productive fantasy season of his career at over 14 fantasy points per game. And that was while Curtis Samuel was the wide receiver 3 on the team behind DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, catching passes from Teddy Bridgewater. And don't forget, too, that Samuel has been used as a runner. He had 41 rush attempts that year with Joe Brady for over 200 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. But even just as a receiver that season, he still averaged 12 PPR points per game, which is not nothing. That is right where Chris Godwin, Cortland Sutton, George Pickens, and Garrett Wilson all were last year as fantasy wide receiver 3s. If that is all that Curtis Samuel gives you this year, that is more than worth a roster spot on your roster as a weekly flex consideration. But just imagine if Samuel does put it all together and does succeed with hands down the best quarterback that he has ever played with, and adds the cherry on top of getting a little bit of rushing work. He doesn't have to replace Stephon Diggs, but what if he's Jaden Reed, who also showed some dual threat ability with 900 total yards and 10 touchdowns, averaging 13.5 points per game last year? Or maybe he's Adam Thielen and is just a PPR safety blanket for Allen with over 1,000 yards and a handful of touchdowns. That is still a fantasy wide receiver too. Or maybe his ultimate upside is like Deebo Samuel last year, doing a little bit of everything on the offense with over 1,100 yards, double-digit touchdowns on a fantastic offense, and finishing as a top 15 guy. There are multiple paths here for Curtis Samuel to more than pay off as a waiver wire ad right now and be anywhere from a possible flex guy during the season to an every week starter. Another wide receiver that I have a ton of interest this year is Cardinals receiver Michael Wilson, who is currently in line for the wide receiver 2 duties behind Marvin Harrison Jr., especially after the news that Zay Jones is going to be suspended for the first 5 games of the season. Now, if you're not familiar with Michael Wilson, he is a second-year receiver drafted in the 3rd round of the 2023 NFL Draft out of Stanford. He is a big-bodied receiver at 6'2", 213 pounds, runs a sub 4.6, and has a 37.5-inch vertical, so he's pretty athletic for his size. His main concern basically all of his career has really just been injuries, as he only played in 14 games throughout throughout his college career, and last year was in and out of the lineup throughout the season too. But he did make some splash plays, and he totaled 6+ targets in 5 of his 13 games played, 3 of which actually came with Kyler Murray at the second half of the season. So now, like I said, Wilson is currently the wide receiver 2 for the Cardinals, and what I believe to be a much improved offense as a whole this year, with a healthy Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison, and Trey McBride garnering the main focus and defensive attention. So Wilson has the ability to be a solid fantasy flex player here. We have seen Kyler Murray sustain multiple receivers at a time for fantasy football. I mean, even AJ Green at 33 years old put up 850 yards and 3 touchdowns back in 2021 while playing with DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Kirk, Rondale Moore, and Zach Ertz. I'm not saying he's due for some massive breakout second season, but I do think that he has upside to be a home run swing flex play a la Gabe Davis or Rashid Shaheed or Brandon Cooks, or maybe he has some consistency, kind of like what we got from Cortland Sutton last year. I think we find out pretty quickly what Michael Wilson is with this opportunity early in the year, to where you can decide to keep him or you can cut him for something better in a week or two. And lastly, I am also a big fan of Chargers wide receiver Josh Palmer this year, and he is still very available in a ton of fantasy leagues out there. But I actually broke down all of the reasons why I love Josh Palmer in a previous video, which you guys can check out right up here.